Hello, I'm Miss Anne, and I'll be reading The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, the OG Elsa. The Flower Garden of the Woman Skilled in Magic. At home, nobody knew what had become of Kai. The boys said that they had seen him tie his little sled to a splendid sleigh which drove the street and out through the gate. Many tears were shed, and little Gerda cried the hardest. People said that he was dead, and that he must have been drowned in the river not far from the city, and Gerda believed them. What a dark and gloomy winter it was. Spring came, and the sunbeams and swallows whispered to Gerda, "We do not believe Kai has died." After a while, Gerda believed them, and she knew she must find Kai. Alone, she walked to the river and asked it for guidance, and it took her away on a long boat past the green shores for a long, long time. Eventually, an old, odd woman saw her and pulled her ashore. She was a kind woman, but lonely and skilled in the art of magic, which she used to make Gerda forget her quest to find her friend. Instead, she made her a happy home in her cottage amongst her magical flowers. Every flower Gerda could imagine grew in that enchanted garden except for the rose, which the old woman magically caused to wither into the ground for the fear it would remind Gerda of her dear friend Kai. For days and weeks, Gerda played in that beautiful place, listening to the stories of the flowers and the dancing in the sunshine, with only the faintest echo of something lost and forgotten knocking at the corners of her mind. One day, Gerda was gazing at the old woman's straw hat, which was covered with beautiful paintings of all the flowers in her garden, including her most favorite of all, the rose. The old woman had forgotten to remove this image from her hat. Gerda ran out amongst the flower beds everywhere, and there was no rose to be seen, so she sat and cried, and her hot tears fell on the very spot where a rose bush had withered into the ground. When the warm tears watered the earth, the rose bush in full bloom sprang up again. She kissed the roses, thought of her own pretty roses at home, and remembered her grandmother and little Kai. She rose with a start, remembering her mission to find Kai, and ran out to the garden. When she looked around, she saw that summer had passed, and it was late in the fall. She could never have guessed she was inside the magic garden, where there was sunshine and flowers all year round. The long willow tree leaves had turned yellow, and the heavy mist dripped from them like water. Leaves fell into the ground around Gerda, who stood, exhausted, in her bare feet and summer clothes. Oh, how dark and dreary was the wide world. Gerda bravely continued on her journey, but eventually was forced to rest. And when she did, a big crow came hopping to her. He looked at her, cocking his head to one side, and then said, "Caw, caw, good caw day." Gerda told the friendly crow her whole story and asked if he had seen Kai. The crow nodded his head gravely and said, maybe I have. Then he told her a story of a clever princess nearby. She decided to marry as soon as she could to find the sort of husband who could give her a good answer when anyone spoke to him, instead of one of those fellows who merely stand around looking impressive, since that is so tiresome. For 2 days, men lined up to approach the princess, but as soon as they entered the palace gates, they had not a word to say. The best they could do, standing in the front of the princess, was to repeat the last word of her remarks, and she did not care for that too much. On the 3rd day, a little person with neither a horse nor carriage walked boldly up to the palace. His eyes sparkled like yours, and he had beautiful long hair, but his clothes were very poor. The crow told of the boy, who was unafraid of the palace guards, and he strode right through the gates. He was polite and handsome, and he was not there to win the princess, but to hear her wisdom. He liked her, and she liked him, and the two were married. "Oh, that was Kai," cried Gerda, and clapped her hands. "He was always so clever. Oh, please take me to the palace." So the crow brought Gerda to the palace and directed her to a little back staircase that led up to the royal bedchamber. Up she climbed, past one magnificent hall after the other. Her heart beat with anticipation, and she remembered Kai's sparkling eyes and his long hair and how he looked when she smiled as they sat under their roses at home. She finally reached the royal bedchamber. The ceiling of it was like the top of a huge palm tree with leaves of costly glass. In the middle of the room, two beds hung from a great stem of gold. One bed was white, and in it slept the princess. The other was red, and Gerda went to look for little Kai there. She thought it must be Kai, so she called his name aloud and held the lamp closer to him. He awoke, turned his head, and it was not little Kai. Gerda cried with disappointment, but the prince and princess were kind and asked the poor girl what was wrong. She told them her story, and when she was through, the prince let Gerda sleep in his own bed. The next day, the prince and princess dressed Gerda in silk and velvet and offered their palace to her as a new home. Instead, she begged them to let her have a little carriage with a horse and a pair of shoes so that she could again go into the wide world to find Kai. The prince and princess gave her all she asked for and bade her a sad farewell. Then the crow and his tearful goodbyes. He flew up into a tree and waved his big black wings as long as he could to see the carriage which shone as brightly as the sun.